Hi, my name is Dr. Melissa Sue John. I'm from Lawrence Simone Publishing House, and each day I bring a special story to you. Today I'll be reading two: the story of Ruby Bridges and Frida B. herself. One's a biography and one's a story. The story of Ruby Bridges by Robert Coles, illustrated by George Floyd. Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylertown, Mississippi. We were very poor, very, very poor, Ruby said. My daddy worked picking crops. We just barely got by. There were times when we didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick the crops, so my daddy just lost his job, and that's when we had to move. I remember us leaving. I was 4, I think. In 1957, the family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor. Her mother took care of the children during the day. After they were tucked in bed, Ruby's mother went to work scrubbing floors in a bank. Every Sunday, the family went to church. We wanted our children to be near God's Spirit, Ruby's mother said. We wanted them to start feeling close to Him from the very start. At the time, black children and white children went to separate schools in New Orleans. The black children were not able to receive the same education as the white children. It wasn't fair, and it was against the nation's law. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools. Three of the girls were sent to Macdonald 19. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was sent to the first grade in William Frantz Elementary School. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take part in an important event in American history. They went to church. We sat there and prayed to God, Ruby's mother said, that we'd all be strong and we'd have the courage and we'd get through any trouble. And Ruby would be a good girl and she'd hold her head high and be a credit to her own people and a credit to all the American people. We prayed long and we prayed hard. On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside Frantz Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police could not help Ruby. The President of the United States ordered federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. The marshals carried guns. Every day for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced a kind of school day. She walked to Frantz School surrounded by marshals, wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying a lunch pail. Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed toward her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school. When Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone except for her teacher, Mrs. Henry. There were no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with and learn with, to eat lunch with. But every day, Ruby went to the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to the business of learning. She was polite and she worked well at her desk. Mrs. Henry said she enjoyed her time here. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or irritable or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I've ever taught. So Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom and an empty building. Sometimes I'd look at her and wonder how she did it, said Mrs. Henry. How she went by those mobs and sat here all by herself and yet seemed so relaxed and comfortable. Mrs. Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if the girl was really nervous and afraid, even though she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait and see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed and hopeful, or if she'd gradually begin to wear down, or even decide that she no longer wanted to go to school. Then one morning something happened. Mrs. Henry stood by a window in her classroom as she usually did, watching Ruby walk toward the school. Suddenly, Ruby stopped, right in front of the mob of howling and screaming people. She stood there facing all those men and women. She seemed to be talking to them. Mrs. Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what Ruby could be saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to move along. They tried to hurry her into the school, but Ruby wouldn't budge. Then Ruby stopped talking and walked into the school. When she went into the classroom, Mrs. Henry asked her what happened. Mrs. Henry told Ruby that she'd been watching and she was surprised when Ruby stopped and talked with the people. Ruby became irritated. "I didn't stop and talk with them," she said. "Ruby, I saw you talking," Mrs. Henry said. "I saw your lips moving." "I wasn't talking," said Ruby. "I was praying. I was praying for them." Every morning, Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from the school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning she forgot until she was already in the middle of the angry mob. When school was over for the day, Ruby hurried through the mob as usual. After she walked a few blocks and the crowd was behind her, Ruby said the prayer she repeated twice a day, before and after school. "Please, God, try to forgive those people, because even though they say those bad things, they don't know what they're doing. So you could forgive them, just like you did those folks a long time ago when they said those terrible things about you." The end. Later that year, 2 white boys joined Ruby at France Elementary School. Their parents were tired of seeing the boys get into mischief around the house when they could have been in school learning. The mob became very angry when the first white students went back to school, but those boys were soon joined by other children. "We've been sitting back and letting our children get cheated out of an education because some people have tried to take the law into their own hands," one parent said. "It's time for us to fight for the side of law and for children's rights to go to school and get an education." They all did get an education, Ruby and a growing number of boys and girls who went to school with her. By the time Ruby was in the 2nd grade, the mobs had given up their struggle to scare Ruby and defeat the federal judge's order that the New Orleans schools should be desegregated so that the children of all races might be in the same classroom. Year after year, Ruby went to Friends School. She graduated from it. Then she went on to graduate from high school. Ruby Bridges is married to a building contractor and has 4 sons. Now a successful business owner, she has created the Ruby Bridges Educational Foundation. With its focus on education, community, and the future of the nature's children, the foundation is especially dedicated to revitalizing the William Frantz School, which is located in the heart of the 9th Ward in New Orleans. Ruby is once again stepping to the forefront and embracing an opportunity to make history by contributing to the challenge that our nation is facing in the recovery efforts following Hurricane Katrina. There is also a special exhibit featuring Ruby's stories at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis in Indianapolis, Indiana, called The Power of Children, Making a Difference. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I will read another. Frida B. Herself by Renetta Bowers, who happens to be a Connecticut local author. Pictures by Michael Chesworth. And this book was autographed to my daughter, Olivia. It says, "To Olivia, dream big and believe in your own Frida B. story." She visited Olivia's school when school was open a couple years ago. Way up in the village of Fiddle-dee-dee, on the corner of Beechwood and Hickory Streets, in a purple brick house, number 33, lives the world's biggest dreamer. Her name is Frida B. Frida B has got wiry, fiery hair, and she rarely wears shoes because she likes her feet bare. She has speckles of freckles all over her nose, and she takes her dog Zilla wherever she goes. Like you and me, Frida B's free to be anyone, anywhere that she dreams she can be. So she dreams her dreams big, some as big as the ocean, and fills them with color and music and motion. By slipping on flippers and making a wish, she can breathe on the water and talk to fish. She can zoom to the moon, she can swing from the stars, she can polka on Pluto with Martians from Mars. She can shrink herself down to the size of a pea so the plant in her window is as big as a tree. But whenever her purple brick house gets too loud, Frida B takes a long quiet nap on a cloud. Frida travels to lands you won't find on a map, like Planet Man do, where they hoot and they clap, and they giggle and wiggle and laugh till they're red if you tell a good joke and you stand on your head. The places she visits are her own creation. She gets there by using her imagination. Sometimes she stands high on top of her bed, grabs her sheets like two reins and yells, "Watch out ahead!" But one summer night, snuggled up in her bed, Frida found that she hadn't one dream in her head. Her mom and her dad had both kissed her goodnight, and they wished her sweet dreams as they turned out the light. But the dreams wouldn't come, and as hard as she tried, Frida B could not find even one dream inside. She pummeled her pillow with pent-up frustration and cried, "I've outgrown it, my imagination." Then poof from her pillow shot feathers in flight. Frida sat up and watched them to her delight. They drifted as bird shadows high on her wall, joining roosters and horses and cows in a stall. Frida followed those birds to a magical farm where the animals sang as they danced arm in arm. She joined in their jig and they had such fun, the moon had to scold them for waking the sun. At dawn as she bid fond farewell to her new friends, Frida B, the big dreamer, was happy again. For those feathers had taught her when dreams will not budge, they're really not lost, they just need a good nudge. So if you hear a whoosh past your window one night, don't be scared. It's probably Frida in flight on her way to Mandu, or the land of Oasis, or one of the jillion more make-believe places. Frida B's a big dreamer, that's certainly true, but the world's biggest dreamer is also in you. All the color and music inside, set it free. Just dream your dreams big and believe they can be. And if, as you dream, you should happen to meet a feisty young girl with red hair and bare feet, you'll talk and you'll laugh and you'll dream and you'll see. You don't have to be Frida to be free to be. So this month, all of our stories have one theme in common, that dreams are accessible to those who believe. So keep on dreaming, and I'll see you tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thank you.